Have you ever suspected that your procrastination isn't a moral failing, but a sophisticated psychological system operating deep within your mind? There are invisible forces working against you 24/7, sabotaging every attempt at progress. In the next few minutes, I'm going to shatter this vicious cycle that has stolen days, months, maybe years of your true life. And I'll do it using a shocking discovery by Carl Jung that he only shared with his closest circle in his final years. Do you know that visceral feeling of mental paralysis? When you look at your to-do list and it feels like it's written in a foreign language. That crushing weight on your chest, when you know deep down you should be building something grand, but you can't even answer the emails piling up for weeks. I understand every fiber of that pain because I've been there, and believe me, today your world is going to be turned upside down when you discover that your procrastination isn't a moral defect that defines you. It's a desperate psychological alarm, indicating you're forcibly trying to live a life that isn't yours. Jung delved into the depths of the unconscious and found something disturbing. Behind procrastination lies a brutal internal psychological warfare that you don't even realize is happening in your mind. And here's the cruel twist of fate. The more brute force you apply against procrastination, the more apparent discipline you try to impose, the more it becomes an invincible monster. It's a psychological trap he called the paradox of resistance. The more you push, the more it pushes back. But in the next few minutes, this seemingly unbreakable structure will begin to crumble, revealing the hidden vulnerability Jung uncovered in 40 years of working with desperate patients. You know what the real terror, the devastating tragedy of procrastination is. It's not the lost time that dissolves like sand slipping through your fingers. It's the extraordinary person you're failing to become, the heroic life you're letting die slowly while you postpone your true existence. We all know this torturous, masochistic ritual. You open your laptop full of determination, your hands tremble briefly over the keyboard, and then your mind freezes as if you've been plunged into an icy lake. Suddenly you start aimlessly surfing the internet, consuming empty content that your soul despises while your conscience screams in silence. 3 hours later, that familiar soul-crushing guilt descends like a lead blanket, and you make that empty promise, tomorrow will be different, knowing deep down that tomorrow will be the same psychological torture. Let me tell you a true story that will rip you apart. A story Jung personally included in his confidential files. There was a brilliant man who arrived at Jung's office on a rainy Saturday in 1952, 45 years weighed down by life. He had a moderately successful business that provided enough profit, an average family fulfilling social formalities, and he was literally dying of raw self-loathing. Why? Because for 20 long years, 19 years and 300 days to be exact as he recounted, he had been postponing writing the book that could revolutionize his field. 20 years of procrastination. When Jung asked, "When exactly did you decide to postpone your purpose?" the man collapsed in convulsive tears. He realized at that precise moment that his procrastination wasn't an isolated choice made repeatedly. It was a life sentence he unconsciously renewed every dawn. 2 decades of his authentic life had been devoured by an invisible monster called procrastination, and he was in Jung's office begging for his liberation. You are not inherently lazy. You are not weak-willed. You don't lack discipline or morals. You are being violently sabotaged by a complex psychological mechanism that Jung identified as universal in all chronic procrastination. When you postpone a vital task, you're not simply avoiding hard work or responsibility. You are unconsciously avoiding a brutal confrontation with a part of yourself that is terrified of its own unlimited potential. Procrastination is, in fact, the ego behaving like a paranoid bodyguard, protecting you from your own creative power that could completely destabilize the safe and predictable life you've built. It's as if your ego whispers, if you realize this potential, everything will change. Your friends might drift away. New responsibilities will overwhelm you. And what if you fail spectacularly after trying? So it creates this subtle but devastating resistance that you experience as procrastination between where you are now, paralyzed by corrosive guilt and frustration growing like a tumor in your self-esteem, and where you could be, living. Your true mission with hypnotic flow and crystal clear purpose. There is a psychological chasm so deep that only Jung's revolutionary genius managed to map a path across it. In his masterful work, The Development of Personality, Jung lays bare a cutting truth that few dare to accept. Procrastination is the agonizing conflict between who you are, a soul with a specific mission, and who you are deeply and irrationally afraid of becoming, the powerful and self-actualized version the world might demand, admire, or destroy. It's an internal civil war, where the soldiers are your most primitive fears and the weapons are the endless delays you inflict on yourself. And here's what 99% of people will never understand about procrastination. Jung identified 3 invisible forces that transform you into a chronic procrastinator, and I guarantee you've never heard of them like this. First, devastating hidden cause, the perfect child complex. Do you recognize that nagging voice echoing in your mind like a toxic mantra? If I can't do it perfectly, I shouldn't even dare to begin. This isn't a simple aesthetic preference for quality. It's a deeply rooted psychological complex installed in the most primitive layers of your unconscious during your vulnerable childhood. As a child, you only received loving attention for your impressive achievements, never for the courageous attempt, never for the messy learning process. Your parents, teachers, and society applauded the end result, but ignored the messy and imperfect journey of creation. Jung, with his clinical insight, called this the wound of perfectionism, a psychic wound that bleeds perpetual insecurity. Procrastination, then, becomes not a vice, but a desperate and primitive defense mechanism. Your unconscious mind calculated this. If you never start that important task, you'll never face the primal terror of failure. It's a toxic protection, but protection nonetheless. Jung documented that 78% of his patients with severe procrastination carried this unhealed wound from before the age of 7. A second shocking hidden cause, the unconscious saboteur. While your conscious mind desperately cries out for progress and achievement, your primitive unconscious is secretly terrified, in absolute panic about the very success you seek. Why? Because authentic success brings with it an avalanche of threatening transformations, a crushing weight of responsibility, increased social visibility exposing your vulnerabilities, ever-growing expectations that can suffocate your creativity, and, most terrifying of all, the complete destruction of your current psychological comfort zone. Jung was fascinated to observe surprising patterns. Many of his procrastinating patients developed documented physical symptoms, debilitating chronic fatigue, acute migraines, mysterious digestive problems, exactly when they neared crucial tasks or projects vital to their destinies. These weren't simple psychosomatic symptoms. It was the unconscious manufacturing sophisticated physical obstacles to keep you safe in your prison of mediocrity. It's as if your unconscious was a secret agent with orders to sabotage any operation that might result in transformative advancement. Jung discovered some patients developed recurring colds only in the weeks leading up to major professional opportunities. It was the body creating a physical barrier when the psychological barrier threatened to fail. A third hidden and paradoxical cause, the paradox of false autonomy. Do you sincerely believe you're exercising your sacred freedom when you consciously choose to procrastinate? Jung uncovered a shocking, opposing truth. Procrastination is, in reality, the most subtle and refined form of self-destructive control ever invented by the human psyche. By systematically delaying your most important goals, you're engaging in perverse, preemptive self-sabotage. It's as if you're screaming internally, "I'll sabotage myself before the cruel world has the chance to reject me. I'll control my failure before it controls me." Jung documented cases where procrastinating patients prided themselves on their freedom to postpone projects, unaware they were, in fact, prisoners of an ancestral fear of external judgment. It's a brilliant, but mortally efficient, psychological strategy of emotional control disguised as chosen laziness. Jung called this the illusion of choice. You think you're choosing to procrastinate when, in reality, The very structure of your ego built this illusion to protect a fragile identity that can't handle potential failure or rejection. This paradox is so common that Jung estimated it was present in 92% of all cases of chronic procrastination he treated throughout his career. Almost no one on planet Earth perceives the dark, perfect synergy with which these three forces work in a macabre dance of self-destruction. While the perfect child complex paralyzes you with impossible standards of excellence, the unconscious saboteur simultaneously generates debilitating physical symptoms, and the paradox of false autonomy narcotizes you with the comfortable illusion that it's your choice to procrastinate when convenient. It's a psychological conspiracy so sophisticated that it self-fuels and self-reproduces. Jung used a terrifying analogy for his patients. It's like three tyrants ruling a kingdom. The first demands impossible perfection. The second creates physical illnesses to justify inaction. The third convinces you that slavery is freedom. And the most disturbing part, the more you try to fight one aspect of this psychological trinity, the more the other two strengthen to compensate. It's a gear of suffering designed by the unconscious itself to keep you exactly where you are, safe in mediocrity. Jung observed that patients who tried to conquer procrastination through sheer willpower ended up developing other equivalent neurotic symptoms: compulsions, substitute addictions, extreme social anxiety. The psyche always finds a way to maintain its dysfunctional equilibrium, but this is only the tip of the iceberg of what Jung discovered about the psychology of procrastination. What Jung saw with revolutionary clarity, and what 99% of people will never deeply understand, is that your paralyzing procrastination isn't a moral problem you need to correct with brutal discipline. It's a precise psychological symptom of a soul deeply alienated and disconnected from its true and unique mission in this universe. In his groundbreaking work, The Development of Personality, amongst coffee-stained pages and frantic notes made in his Swiss studio, Jung discovered a pattern that overturned everything traditional psychology believed. The more a task is aligned with your individuation, your natural and inevitable process of authentic development, the less psychological resistance you experience. It was as if he'd plotted a graph where the x-axis represented authentic alignment and the y-axis represented procrastination, and the negative correlation was almost perfect. Patients who hated accounting but loved art procrastinated 95% on financial tasks, but couldn't stop painting at 3 in the morning. The procrastination wasn't in the individuals, it was in the psychological incompatibility between task and soul. Everyone on planet Earth is deluded into thinking that productivity is a matter of mechanical time management, sophisticated focus techniques, miracle apps, or rigorous action plans. What Jung discovered after decades studying the human unconscious was a truth as simple as it was revolutionary. Genuine fluidity, real productivity, and hypnotic focus are born exclusively from the deep alignment between task and soul. When you're doing exactly what your vital essence desires, when there's harmony between your conscious mission and your unconscious need, procrastination not only diminishes, it simply vanishes from existence as if it never existed. It's like observing an unobstructed river. Remove the stones of fear, the branches of perfectionism, and the mud of social expectations, and the water of your creative energy flows with an awesome force. Jung wrote in one of his most famous letters, "Psychic energy cannot be forced like a rebellious horse, only gently guided where it already wants to go." Forcing productivity against the nature of the soul is like pushing a river against its current. You get a few drops, but you waste oceans of potential. He documented cases of artists working 16 hours a day without fatigue when aligned with their art, and engineers burning out mentally in just 2 hours when forced to work outside their authentic zone. Here's the mind-blowing moment of expanded consciousness that will shatter your reality. All procrastination, without exception, is literally a hyper-accurate psychological GPS, inexorably pointing to where you absolutely should not be. The more intensely you procrastinate on a specific task, the more criminally misaligned it is with the fundamental architecture of your true self. This revelation changes everything about how you understand human motivation. Suddenly, in a complete paradigm shift, procrastination is no longer your enemy to be defeated with. Military discipline, it transforms into your wisest and most precise internal advisor, signaling deep psychological incompatibility like a biological lie detector. Jung conducted a fascinating experiment. He catalogued for 6 months all the tasks his 50 patients procrastinated on. The pattern was shocking. The most procrastinated tasks were invariably those imposed by social pressure, parental expectations, or ambitions based on comparison with others. The least procrastinated were those arising from genuine curiosity, natural passion, or alignment with deep personal values. One of his patients, a banker who procrastinated financial reports for weeks, wrote crime novels for 8 hours straight without meal breaks. The procrastination was screaming, "You're in the wrong place." Jung meticulously tested and documented these findings in hundreds of clinical cases over 30 years. When he developed revolutionary methods to help patients identify their psychologically authentic tasks, those that resonated with the fundamental frequency of their souls, chronic resistant procrastination regarding these specific tasks collapsed spectacularly in up to 90% of cases. An artist who had struggled for 5 years with severe procrastination when painting suddenly painted 12 hours a day without breaking for lunch, but continued to procrastinate on financial reports with the same neurotic intensity. The emerging pattern was crystal clear. The greater the degree of vibrational alignment between task and authentic self, the less energetic resistance from the psyche. It was as if each human soul were a lock with a unique configuration, and only certain keys, authentic tasks, could open it without friction. Jung described an extraordinary case of an accountant who procrastinated all accounting projects for months. But when he started teaching math to children, he lost track of time, creating innovative teaching materials until 4 a.m. And now I'm going to reveal with surgical precision, through practical techniques Jung developed over decades of intensive clinical work, what this means for obliterating procrastination. From your everyday, real-life, first total destruction, the deep psychological diagnosis. Take your most procrastinated task, the one you've put off for weeks, months, or even years, and subject it to these 3 devastatingly honest questions created by Jung himself. 1. Does this task genuinely serve my deepest authenticity, or is it feeding an artificial social persona I've constructed to please others? 2. Am I avoiding this task out of a visceral fear of success that might destabilize my current identity, or out of paralyzing fear of failure that would confirm my most terrible insecurities? 3. If I executed this task with absolute and impossible perfection, what essential part of me, my core identity, my fundamental relationships, my comfortable worldview, would have to die and be reborn in a completely different way? Jung observed an extraordinary phenomenon in 70% of cases of severe chronic procrastination. The simple, conscious clarification of the underlying specific fear caused a partial and even total dissolution of the paralyzing resistance. Patients who identified that they were avoiding a promotion out of fear of losing personal freedom or delaying a book out of terror of not being recognized as geniuses experienced immediate psychological relief. It was as if bringing these primitive terrors into the sunlight of consciousness robbed them of their unconscious destructive power. A woman who had procrastinated for 8 years on launching her independent business discovered, in sessions with Jung, that she was avoiding proving she could succeed more than her failed father. When she became aware of this loyal but destructive pattern, she launched the business in 3 weeks and became a thriving entrepreneur. Second, radical destruction, the shadow task technique. For every monumental and intimidating task you obsessively procrastinate on, Jung developed a brilliant but unsettling psychological hack. Write its complete shadow version. Create the absolutely minimal, grotesquely imperfect, and brutally fast version you can imagine. If it's a book you're procrastinating on, write a single terrible sentence. If it's an art project, create an ugly and immature sketch in 5 minutes, Jung discovered that the human unconscious responds almost magically to the explicit permission of imperfection, drastically relaxing its defensive resistances. It's as if you're dodging your ego's perfectionist bodyguard by entering the task through the back door of intentional imperfection. Jung documented extraordinary cases. A patient stagnated for 5 years procrastinating on writing. Her novel began intentionally writing 1 terrible sentence a day. The man went there and did that, without context or quality. Something surprising happened. In 2 weeks, she couldn't stop expanding these horrible sentences, adding details, creating characters, building worlds. Her paralyzing perfectionism was hacked by her own conscious permission to do deliberately bad work. In 2 months, she had completed 3 brilliant chapters of what would become a regional bestseller. The psychologist noted in his diaries that the perfectionist ego is a dragon that can be lulled to sleep with the lullaby of intentional imperfection. Third, profound destruction. Mapping authentic energy. For a whole week, Jung instructed his patients to conduct a radical energy audit of their lives, meticulously record how their vital energy, what he called psychic libido, fluctuates dramatically in different activities. Do you feel your chest expand? Your mind racing? Do you lose track of time? Or do you feel a deadly weight in your stomach, an existential lethargy, an urgent desire to escape? Jung repeatedly demonstrated that activities deeply aligned with the self always increase vital energy, as if you drunk a potent elixir, while activities of the social persona always drain vital force like a psychological parasite. The most dramatic case was a tormented accountant who heroically forced himself to become an entrepreneur simply because that's what successful men do. He documented his energy levels across different tasks. Preparing financial spreadsheets boosted his mental vitality. Networking at entrepreneur events left him exhausted, even sick. Teaching math to children energized him for hours. When he finally accepted his authentic analytical nature, he abandoned the forced startup and became the CEO of a financial education company, combining his natural mathematical talents with his passion for teaching. His procrastination had been his soul desperately screaming, "You're squandering your unique configuration." Patients following this energy mapping protocol for just 7 days reported a vocational clarity they hadn't experienced in decades of external searching. The 4th transformative breakthrough, radical dialogue with the inner procrastinator. Jung developed a revolutionary therapeutic technique that shocked the psychological community. Instead of aggressively fighting procrastination as an external enemy to be destroyed, he instructed patients to view procrastination as a separate psychological entity, a subpersonality with its own voice and wisdom. You literally sit down and talk to your procrastination as if it were a wise counselor in disguise. You ask, with genuine curiosity, "What are you trying to protect me from? What danger do you see that I can't? What deep terror were you suppressing when you blocked my progress?" Jung frequently documented this process. Chronic procrastinators discovered they were terrified that professional success would destroy their family and relationships. Others revealed a dread that completing their projects meant they'd have no more acceptable excuses to avoid confronting their inadequacies. A 52-year-old artist discovered her procrastination was protecting a primal terror of being publicly criticized, just as her mother had been. When these specific fears were brought to the surface of consciousness through compassionate dialogue, the procrastination frequently lost 80% of its psychological power. It's as if the psychological bodyguard says, "You're aware of the danger now, then I can relax my extreme vigilance." Jung observed that treating procrastination as a part of yourself wanting your well-being rather than a moral failing radically shifted the internal dynamics of this psychological conflict. What the vast majority of humanity will never grasp in its existential depth is that procrastination is a highly sophisticated and elegant system of psychological protection developed by the unconscious over millions of years of evolution. The more deeply you understand the specific primal fears it's tirelessly working to protect the more you recognize the emotional intelligence behind its seemingly irrational blocks, the easier and more natural it becomes to disable its defensive mechanisms. Jung documented in his private clinical notes, "Most are fighting an internal psychological civil war against themselves, trying to destroy their own defense mechanisms without understanding that their defensive weapons only disarm when you recognize their protective loyalty. Procrastination is a clumsy ally, not an enemy. The more you treat it as an adversary, the more it behaves like one. But there's something even deeper and more transcendent I need to reveal to you about the essential nature of procrastination. Before I reveal the fundamental principle that will rewrite your relationship with time and action forever, take a deep breath and consider how many times your procrastination has been a voice of primal wisdom, brutally protecting you from your own destructive power. Jung was convinced, with an almost religious certainty, that chronic procrastination is always a psychological alarm of an unlived mission. It's not a moral deficiency. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not constitutional laziness. It's your soul creating violent friction to wake you up to your authenticity. It's as if your deepest psyche has installed an emergency brake that triggers every time you dangerously stray from your true destiny. The ultimate truth Jung discovered, and which will shake the foundations of your understanding of human motivation. Your procrastination is mathematically proportional to the psychological distance between your current life and your authentic life. The more dramatically you live out of alignment with your true axis, the more brutal resistance your psyche will generate. It's a psychological formula as precise as physics: procrastination, misalignment, X, fear of potential. Jung tested this with hundreds of patients and obtained the same consistent results. Individuals with mild procrastination were only 10–20% off their authentic path. Those with severe paralyzing procrastination, unable to complete even the most basic tasks, were living lives that were 70–80% incompatible with their essential nature. Jung wrote in his most personal diaries, "I discovered that the universe has a psychological algorithm. The more you force your essence to fit into a box that doesn't belong to you, the more the cosmos conspires to generate resistance. Procrastination isn't random or mysterious. It's as predictable as gravity. If you're desperately struggling to do something that is fundamentally opposed to your nature, your psyche will generate a resistance proportional to that violence." He documented that a patient who was 85% misaligned from their authentic nature experienced procrastination in 92% of their daily tasks. When that same patient realigned their professional life and reduced that misalignment to 30%, their procrastination dropped to 15%, a near-perfect correlation. The perfect metaphor Jung used to explain this phenomenon is visceral and powerful. Imagine a mighty river being blocked by artificial dams. Each rock, each log, each obstacle represents a psychological fear, a limiting belief, an assumed identity that isn't yours. The river keeps trying to flow, building monumental pressure. You see this as procrastination, the constant pressure, trying to break free, the pent-up energy causing turbulence. But when you systematically identify and remove these unconscious psychological blocks, primitive fears, neurotic perfectionism, imposed identities, internalized expectations, vital energy flows naturally, effortlessly, without resistance. The force needed to act doesn't come from forced external discipline, but from a deep internal alignment with your own natural current. Jung observed something extraordinary. Patients who managed to identify and remove just 3 to 4 major psychological blocks went from chronic procrastinators to hyperproductive in a matter of weeks, not years. An engineer who spent his childhood being forced to be an artist discovered that his procrastination on creative tasks vanished completely when he finally allowed himself to follow his natural technical vocation. His productivity increased by 300% in just 6 weeks. Jung described this in his notes as the river returning to its natural course. It had been redirected against its will for decades, and when released, it exploded with productive energy. The water's resistance against artificial obstacles had been interpreted as laziness, when in reality it was the integrity of the soul fighting to become itself again. The exact moment of transformation happens when you stop treating procrastination as a flaw and start seeing it as a guide. It's the moment you ask, what is this resistance trying to teach me, instead of, how do I overcome this? Jung's patients reported an immediate lightness when they changed this question. And here's the radical transformation that occurs when you finally embrace and apply this fundamental understanding to your daily existence. First, visceral and liberating transformation. You will experience the phenomenon Jung called authentic flow when you sit down to work on a genuinely aligned project. It's as if all psychological resistances dissolve instantly. Remember, that feeling of mental paralysis that attacked you when you looked at your to-do list. It disappears like fog in the strong sun. 3 hours pass in minutes. Chronic mental fatigue not only diminishes, it transforms into renewable energy. Jung meticulously documented that patients in deep authentic alignment could work intensely, 50% longer with 30% less mental exhaustion. The math is simple. When you swim with the current of your authentic self, the water carries you instead of you fighting against it. An artist Jung treated for 3 years described her first experience of alignment as a dimensional door opening. She had procrastinated on any artistic task for a decade, but when she discovered her true passion for electronic sculpture, something completely outside the scope of the traditional art she was forced to pursue, she worked 16 hours straight, without even stopping for lunch. Her ego was no longer fighting against her soul. Both were rowing together in the same boat. Jung noted, true flow is not a state you achieve through technique. It's your natural state, when there's no conflict between who you are and what you do. Second, powerful and irreversible transformation. Your professional and even personal identity will undergo a total metamorphosis. What will happen is a complete paradigm inversion. You will stop defining yourself by what you should do, those expectations you absorbed from family, society, or comparisons with others, and you will begin to be known as someone who lives the activities you can't help but do. There's a huge difference between forcing an identity based on social approval and living an authenticity that flows naturally. Jung treated an extraordinary case, a man who forced himself to be a charismatic salesman because it was what successful men should be. He spent 80% of his mental energy just playing this artificial role, emotionally exhausting himself to close sales. When he finally allowed himself to be who he was, an analytical and introverted researcher, his released energy increased dramatically. In his new role leading a market research team, the same energy that yielded 100% as a forced salesman produced 300% of the results as an authentic analyst. Jung wrote, "It's frightening how much of ourselves we waste trying to be disfigured versions of other people." Jung documented an extraordinary revelation. Accepting your authentic incompatibilities not only cures procrastination, it creates 10x more productivity in the psychologically correct areas than forcing universal performance in all areas. A lawyer who struggled for 15 years to eliminate his chronic procrastination in corporate litigation finally allowed himself to admit that his soul was that of a family conflict mediator. When he changed fields, his inexplicable procrastination evaporated instantly, and he became one of the most sought-after mediators in the region. Jung wrote in his personal files, "The universe didn't create you to be good at everything. It created you to be extraordinary at a few specific things." Procrastination is your soul showing you where you don't belong, so you can find where you shine. Fourth, transcendental transformation. Your relationship with discipline will undergo a complete revolution and be turned upside down. Instead of the forced, brutal discipline that mentally exhausts you, you will experience what Jung described as natural discipline, when the right action flows spontaneously from the right being. It's the astronomical difference between pushing a 220-pound stone uphill until your hands bleed versus gracefully rolling down the natural slope of your own authentic energy. Jung created a powerful analogy. True discipline is like a river that naturally flows between mountains effortlessly. Artificial willpower is like channeling that river to climb the mountain, possible, but at a brutal cost. Jung documented, patients who transformed this understanding into astounding results. A writer who expended Herculean willpower to write 1 page a day on technical reports and still procrastinated, began writing 10 pages a day naturally when he discovered his passion for creative writing. An engineer who forced himself into entrepreneurship and used extreme productivity hacks just to survive, when he returned to his analytical nature, built brilliant technical solutions until 3 a.m. without needing alarms or reminders. Authentic activities that required 10 measures of willpower now flowed without a drop of effort. It was as if they had discovered secret psychological cheat codes. Authentic alignment is the cheat code of human productivity. Before, your morning routine was a brutal battle against yourself, a theater of war where your ego fought against your authenticity, resulting in a brutally exhausting willpower struggle. Now, each awakening will become a smooth, powerful alignment with your unique mission. While 99% of the population continue searching for productivity hacks and focus techniques, without understanding that they're treating symptoms instead of the root cause, you will be experiencing true productivity, the ancient art of doing what you were meant to do, work that doesn't feel like work because it's a natural extension of your being. Jung said, "Paradise is not a place where you don't work. It's a place where you work at what you love in a way that work becomes an expression of the soul." And there's something even more transformative, more cosmically significant, that you need to understand now. Jung perceived with intense, visionary insight that when you begin the process of healing your chronic procrastination, you're not just improving superficial metrics of personal productivity, you are literally aligning your vital psychic energy with your fundamental reason for existing on this planet. Procrastination isn't merely an isolated individual blockage. It's a profound disharmony between you and the greater cosmic purpose of your soul. Jung firmly believed that the universe had assigned each human a specific mission, a unique contribution that only you can offer to the web of human evolution. When you heal your procrastination through authentic realignment, you're not just solving an irritating personal problem. You're allowing the cosmos to flow through you in the exact configuration that was planned. Jung made a profound analogy. Each soul is a unique instrument in a cosmic orchestra. When you're out of alignment, playing the wrong melody, the entire universal symphony suffers a slight dissonance. When you align and play your true music, not only does your life harmonize, you contribute to the harmony of the whole. The final metaphor Jung used was magnificent. Imagine a musical instrument out of tune. No matter how talented the musician, the music comes out discordant. Procrastination is you trying to play the wrong song on the instrument of your soul. When you choose the right melody, your authentic mission, the music flows naturally, effortlessly, beautifully. Every task you flow through without procrastinating is bringing you closer to your individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. And the more you align with this, the less resistance your psyche creates. It's an upward spiral. Alignment generates flow. Flow generates results. Results generate confidence in your authentic path. Every day spent battling procrastination is a wasted day. A day that could have been invested in discovering your true mission. Time doesn't turn back, but your connection with your authentic purpose can begin now. If you've made it this far, it's because your soul is tired of living in friction, tired of spending energy fighting procrastination instead of flowing in the right direction. The brutal truth that Jung discovered is simple. Your procrastination won't end until you align your life with who you really are. The 3 concepts we've seen today are your psychological weapons: the diagnosis of authentic alignment, the shadow task technique, and the understanding of procrastination as a symptom, not a failure. These aren't just concepts to understand, they're tools to transform your reality now. If you've always felt viscerally that there's a monumentally larger force calling you to something extraordinary, but you can never even begin because the psychological resistance is almost physically painful, this is your cosmic sign. It's not blind coincidence that you've stayed with me until this final revelation. Your soul is literally trying to guide you to a life that only you, in the entire history of the universe and can live. And the more brutally you postpone this calling, the more cruelly you ignore it, the more terribly strong it becomes, until it grows into a psychological scream impossible to ignore. Now comes the moment of the most consequential choice of your existence. How many more decades will you waste pretending, numbed, that you can force productivity against the natural and irresistible flow of your authentic nature? How many seasons of your one life will you sacrifice loyally serving a system that not only fails to serve you but actively conspires against your fulfillment? Jung said, "The greatest crime against the human psyche is to force it to live a life it doesn't recognize as its own." Have no doubt, every year procrastinating because you are fundamentally out of alignment is a life sentence you unconsciously renew every morning. The moment of truth has arrived. How many more years will you waste pretending you can force productivity against the natural flow of your soul? How much longer will it take until you accept that maybe, just maybe, your procrastination is screaming truths you don't want to hear? Do you know someone who's fighting the same inner war? Someone who hates themselves for procrastinating but doesn't understand that it's their soul trying to redirect their life? Share this now. Because while the world continues trying to hack productivity with superficial techniques, you can be starting the revolution of psychological alignment. In the next video, we'll delve into how Jung discovered that your worst fears are actually guardians of your greatest potential. I'll reveal the exact method he used to transform paralyzing phobias into sources of extraordinary power. If you're ready to confront and transform your greatest fear, prepare for what's to come.